Good afternoon, folks, East Coast time. Good morning, folks, Pacific West Coast time. And good evening, good night, folks, India time, because we do have viewers from India also, to this Political LeaderSpeak Hour with Robinder Sachdev. Thank you very much and welcome. This show is hosted by the US India Political Action Committee and the Imagine India Institute. My name is Robinder Sachdev. I'm the president of Imagine India Institute. Every Saturday noon hour, we hold a discussion on geopolitics, on domestic American context, especially with a focus on Indian American community, and of course the wider context of American society and American politics. This Saturday, I think, is a very interesting, it's a narrow topic, but a very interesting and a very pivotal topic today, which would have major impact and repercussions on American policy, domestic as well as international, over the next 4 years, because it will determine which way the US Senate leans. And as we know, the US Senate has quite a voice and quite a weight in terms of shaping American policy, domestic as well as international. Now, to examine and speculate what could be the flavor emerging of the Senate runoff elections, which are due on this coming Tuesday, we have a brilliant panel with us who will share their views, and they come with their own perspectives, which we welcome. So let me now welcome our panelists who will be joining this discussion. It is our pleasure to have with us today Akshobh Giridhardas, a former journalist and a public policy professional. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Robin.
Sorry. My apologies. We have Ashish Agarwal, a member of the advisory board of Indian Voices for Trump. And we have Steve Rao, council member, former mayor pro tem, Morrisville, North Carolina. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Happy New Year to everybody.
Thank you, sir. And of course, we have Stephen Alonso, Government Affairs and PAC Manager for the US India Political Action Committee. Welcome to the panelists, and we look forward to hearing your views. So folks who are watching this show right now live, please put in your comments and questions, check by, wave by, share this link for the live stream on your own Facebook pages so that it reaches more people. And any thoughts you have, I'm sure that if you put in your comments, our panel here would be more than happy and delighted to kind of, reflect or answer your questions or to share their opinion or their views on what your thoughts are. So please bring in any comments that are there. This is right now going live on the US Impact Facebook page as well as the Imagine India Facebook page. Now, let us begin this discussion with an opening round. And for the sake of our listeners, the discussion will proceed in rounds. It's conversation style. In some senses, you can even say it's a slow conversation as opposed to fast, quick bites and debates. This is not a debate; it's a discussion and a conversation. And each view is welcome. So let me begin the first round with opening thoughts on the topic of the day, with inviting Akshobh Giridhardas, a former journalist and public policy professional. Sir, what do you think of the topic, and what is your estimate? I think everybody would want to know, how the results will turn out. But before the results turn out, what do you think are the dynamics which are shaping the, electorate, and which way you think it is leaning?
Right. Well, at the outset, Happy New Year to you, Robin. Happy New Year to my fellow panelists, and thank you for US Impact for putting this together. So it's a good start for the new year, and I hope that omens continue in 2021 because we could all use a new fresh start from 2020. It's by happenstance I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, so the state where all states are looking at right now, and I joked that I got here on the day the state flipped blue, so maybe I brought in some political luck for anyone. And it's funny right now because I've had a good chance to speak to family members who are Georgian voters, and I'm speaking to a friend or two who are Georgian voters. Right now, we're being bombarded with ads. You can't go through a YouTube clip without a Leffler or an Ossoff or a Warnock or a Purdue ad coming around, and Super PAC ads. I think it's already exceeded $540 million in ad spending by the four of them and independent super PACs. Of course, it is the one thing that decides the fate of Biden's policy, President-elect Biden's policy for the next 4 years, because we've seen Washington in gridlock right now. Because as it stands, it's 50 Republicans, 46 Democrats, and 2 independents, and Angus King in Maine, and Bernie Sanders of Vermont, who tend to vote Democratic. So the ideal case for the Democrats would be winning 2 seats, but even then, it'll be a 50-50 deadlock. And of course, if it goes to tiebreaker, that'll be Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. So that would be cataclysmic for the Republicans, who just need one of the 2 seats to retain a complete majority. And after losing the White House and losing, not getting back the House of Representatives, this is sort of what McConnell and the senior ilk of the Republican Party want. From the looks of just talking to people here, they would see it's very unlikely that Democrats are going to get two, because the way it's becoming very polarized right now. The thing is, it's not just moderate Republicans. Purdue and Loeffler sort of represent a sort of the Trump ilk of Republicans. So if people are still looking at the voting alongside what Trump's agenda was, it'll be Purdue and Loeffler that'll get votes. But it's very interesting to look at Georgia, right? To look at how the Georgia Senate is going to go, you have to look at how the general went. This is the first time since 1992, since Bill Clinton, that Georgia's gone blue. And if you look at the electoral map right now, Georgia's like a blue oasis in a very red conservative desert, right? And who would have thought Jimmy Carter would be alive long enough to see Georgia go blue? And I think right now it's almost impossible to see a bipartisan split. It's very hard to look at a Purdue Warnock or a Loeffler Ossoff because of how different they all are, especially Purdue and Loeffler. So it's very hard to look at what you have in Ohio, with a split. And I think right now what it seemed like all or nothing for the Democrats. So I think the Republicans are in an easier spot in terms of just getting one of the 2 seats. So right now, what most people that I'm speaking to in Georgia are telling me right now is that if the general election is any move of the country, that if people were sort of with a referendum on Trump more than the Democrats winning it, more than Trump and the Republicans losing it, then I think both Purdue and Loeffler are in for a tough time. But at the same time, there are also people who are talking about Ossoff, who's a very young, charismatic guy, but the guy is not old enough to be president. He's 33. He's literally not old enough to be president. A lot of people that I've spoken to say that, look, he's a nice guy, but he hasn't really done anything, just by virtue of his young novice experience. But that being said, people are not happy with Purdue. And they said if Purdue was only, like these are Democrats I'm speaking to, they're like, if Purdue was only a little bit moderate, like the Charlie Baker of Massachusetts, or like John Kasich of Ohio, just a little bit moderate and not extreme. And I think the Kamala Mala thing just totally pushed it off the edge for a lot of people. That if Purdue was just a little bit of moderate, they could have considered it. I mean, if you think about Purdue and Ossoff, it's a whole generation, and Purdue's literally old enough to be his dad. And Warnock itself is someone who's not tested politically, comes with a very Obama-esque, activism background, and would be the state's first African American senator. And Loeffler, of course, is someone that people are unhappy with. So it's a very contentious thing right now, and I see this getting dragged out. Thank you so much for my time, Robert.
Thank you so much. I think you captured so many nuances and flavors and colors of this whole thing that probably we'll be kind of, going deeper or around or filling in the gaps or the meats to the bones of what your opening thoughts are. Thank you so much, Akshay. Now may I
Pleasure.
invite Ashish Agarwal for his opening thoughts and views on how do you see where it goes and what are the dynamics you think?
Well, first of all, thank you again for hosting this and for inviting me. As I've said before on your panel, I think it's so important that Indian Americans become more involved in the political system, and I think this forum is a great way to do that. So, as you mentioned, I very much come from a Republican perspective. I was part of the Trump administration, and I served. I had a role on an advisory board in his campaign. So I definitely have a rooting interest in these seats. My hope is that the Republicans prevail in these contests. Of course, Georgia has historically been a red state, a center right state. That flipped this election cycle, but it flipped for reasons that I suspect might not end up carrying the day. This coming Tuesday, which is that a huge part of the election results had to do with COVID and the kind of a populace that was just very frustrated with the state of play and the economy, and rightly or wrongly, any incumbent is going to take the blame for that. Winston Churchill lost an election at the end of World War II because the British population was tired. Well, now that we have multiple vaccines in the pipeline, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Fortunately, that issue is a little bit off the table. I think another part of the reason why Georgia went blue this past cycle was probably a little bit of Trump fatigue. You certainly had some Republicans that didn't turn out in full force for the president. At least that seems to be the case. You also had people who were just a little bit tired, I think, of all of the constant Twitter back and forth. I'm not blaming the president for all of that by a long shot, but there was this sense of just what you might call Trump fatigue. Well, going forward on Tuesday, those issues aren't as much on the table as they have been previously. And so now you very much have a situation where the as you mentioned, really the fate of the national agenda over the next 2 years at least is going to depend in large part on what happens with these two races. And I think one question for voters in Georgia is, do they want to have a kind of a more centrist, center left approach that President-elect Biden has promised, or do they want to go with a much more progressive agenda of the sort promised by Senator Sanders and Senator Warren? If it's the former, if it's the case that Georgia is still a centrist state, a center right state, I think it is. I think that the Republicans will do very well. If Georgia voters are in the mood for more radical changes, then the Democrats may carry the day.
Thank you so much, Ashish. In fact, you mentioned the term Trump fatigue or something like that. In fact, the second round's opening question overall is going to lead into with that how are President Trump's, whatever, I mean, he's doing, his tweets, his stance, how is that impacting the election? But that's for the second round. Now, may I invite Steve Rao, council member and former mayor pro tem of Morrisville, North Carolina. Steve, welcome with your opening thoughts and comments, and how and where do you see the winds blowing?
Thank you. I hope you guys can hear me okay. Just text in if you can't. Wi-Fi issues going on here. But I just want to thank everyone, wish everyone a happy new year. And I guess the first thing I would say to those listening is, I think that this election is so critically important for the future of America under a Biden presidency. I think the future of the Supreme Court, future economic relief efforts with the stimulus relief, whether Americans will get $2,000, $2,500, and just addressing how we deal with the pandemic moving forward. So this is just a critically important election. And if you had asked me about a month ago, I would have said that, I thought that it would definitely be hard for the Democrats to even win one seat. But as I've been looking at the numbers and following the news in Georgia, I'm starting to believe that the Republicans are in trouble. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, we're going to talk about in a minute, President Trump. I think that's a big problem for both Senator Loeffler and Senator Perdue. But we can talk about that in a second. But I think, first of all, the early vote numbers are really, really high right now, about 2.5 million. And I think that those numbers are heavily favoring the Democrats. I think that Republicans have to have a really, really big day on Tuesday. And I think that's the million-dollar question, is will they turn out? Maybe they will. I think if they will, then they'll win at least one seat. But if they're not able to overcome what they did not overcome on Election Day, let's remember that President-elect Biden won by 12,000 votes. So right now, the Trump campaign is working on getting into those more rural areas of Georgia, places away from the urban areas like Atlanta and like I think DeKalb County, going to more. And I went to college at Emory, but I'm forgetting some of my Georgia counties. But it didn't work in the presidential election. So I think really that's the key. And I think the black vote's going to be also important as well, the minority vote. And we're going to talk about Trump in a minute, but I'll close out with, it's just been, if I had a word to describe 2020, it would be turbulence. Turbulence on the economic front, turbulence on the healthcare with over 500,000 expected to be dead by the end of January, political division, racial turmoil. And Joe Biden will be the first president to deal with all four crises at once. We've dealt with these kinds of crises in the U.S. before, but not all four at once. We've dealt with pandemics 100 years ago. We've dealt with economic crisis. We've dealt with threats to democracy, but it's going to be very interesting to see what happens on Tuesday. So my prediction right now is I think the Democrats will win one of the two seats. I think the momentum is shifting in their favor, largely because of President Trump's refusal to concede. And I think that could backfire and could cost him a second seat. So I'm predicting actually a Hail Mary, two Democratic narrow victory, and a Democratic Senate for President Joe Biden.
Sure. Thank you so much, Steve. Yes, those are the dynamics that you very well mentioned, which are out there. And yes, the early vote, I think it's said to be around 3 million, which has already come in. And it would be interesting to see who are those. And yes, now it depends upon the voter turnout on the day, which is on Tuesday, which the Republicans would be driving hard, perhaps. If we go back to, what happened in the general election, similarly was their strategy perhaps there. Now, may I invite Stephen Alonso, Government Affairs and PAC Manager of the US India Political Action Committee. Stephen, your thoughts and views as, let's say, your opening comments on the topic of the day. How do you see these elections going? What are the dynamics you see? What would you care to share? And please, for the viewers who are watching this live stream, please put in any questions you have, any thoughts you have, and I'm sure our guests would be happy to take it. I'll take them up. So please bring in your comments. There's a live show right now going on US Impact Facebook page, Imagine India Facebook page. Please put in your thoughts. Thank you so much. Steve, please.
Well, thank you, Robinder. Happy New Year and happy holiday season to everybody watching and our panelists. And like I said, especially everybody else watching at home and wherever they might be. So, yes, it's a very interesting race upcoming. It's kind of very rare to have two dueling runoff elections, especially with such high importance, with generally the control of Congress, especially the U.S. Senate, up for stakes. So it's as sort of mentioned earlier, it's the interesting dynamics having the two, candidates on both sides kind of being unique in their own ways and then different in another. What I'm referring to is with, somebody like Reverend Warnock being an established community member, community leader, also kind of campaigning side by side with somebody like John Ossoff, who, like as mentioned, he's been had time on Capitol Hill and times with his various nonprofits and such, but hasn't quite been the most seasoned political leader. However, that might be something what some folks are looking for, even though he might not be old enough to become president right this moment. But it's going to be very interesting to see what the ultimate final ending split is going to be, whether it is going to be both parties holding on to both seats or one holding the other, or Republicans losing both. I'm early on predictions are sort of having I wouldn't totally be shocked to see a Warnock-Perdue split, just with seeing it's with the recent the issues that Senator Loeffler had with her stocks and that sort of rubbing folks the wrong way even during her primary in the initial election, and whereas like I said, it just seems like the general thought with Mr. Ossoff is that he just hasn't quite have the background or experience as to he quite barely didn't quite make it up in when he was working on Capitol Hill. Yes, he did spend some time with Congressman Johnson, but generally there's a lot of folks who do become staffers and then wind up serving in the Congress themselves, but they tend to be chiefs of staff or a lot of folks with other background, real hardened experience. John Ossoff is sort of riding the wave of the young progressive movement. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just gonna be interesting to see how it ultimately plays out. I'm sort of even when the after the general election back in November, when it kind of said, here's what it's going to turn out to be, I early on did predict the Warnock-Perdue split. I wouldn't be surprised to sort of see that's the ultimate results. But the polls and such are very close, especially Ossoff and Perdue. That's within 1 point. I mean, of course, they're both within the margin of error, but especially the Ossoff-Perdue split race, that's all very, very close. So it's going to be very interesting to see what ultimately happens on Tuesday.
Sure. Thank you so much, Stephen, for your thoughts and your insight and analysis, how it goes. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting. There are only two seats, so to say. So either 0-2, 1-1, or 2-0. who knows? And that's the discussion out here. Now, what could lead to that situation? 0-2, 1-1, or 2-0, to a good extent, is also influenced by, of course, President Trump, right? So, in this round, I would like to hear your views on how do you think and what do you think President Trump, of course, he's doing the best for his party, or what the Republicans, or I mean, it's a mix out there, right? And also, of course, his own calculations about his own presidency right now, which he is challenging. So, how do you see what President Trump has been talking about, tweeting about, and even let's say the Republican governor, and I mean, there are gaps out there happening. So, what do you think his actions are helping or hurting the party, or are they kind of energizing the base, which is what the GOP really wants? So, what would be your thoughts on that? So, let's begin this round again as we started with Akshop Girdhar Das, former journalist and public policy professional.
Yeah.
Akshop, what would be your take on this, please?
Yeah, just thank you, Robin. Just to touch on Steve's point as well in terms of the Trump fatigue, but I just wanted to kind of talk about in the generals, right? If you think about it, in before Trump, in the last 100 years or so, only four incumbents have lost the general, right? And that's happens because one of two things, right? Primarily because it's a crisis. And it's not so much that the incumbent has caused the crisis, but it's how well they handle the crisis. In this very state, Jimmy Carter lost it because of the Iran hostage crisis. Bush 41 with the recession coming. Herbert Hoover, we have to go back to Herbert Hoover with the Great Depression. Similarly, COVID was Trump's crisis. And right now at Georgia, like so many other states which are reeling from the impacts of this, they see that and they see the Trumpian DNA in governors like Brian Kemp and David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, senators. Trump right now is, I wouldn't say reviled ad nauseum, but he hasn't done himself favors. As the Georgia Secretary of State had come out and announced formally, look, the state of Georgia is final. Trump's lost it. Trump has, of course, come out with very strong, vicious comments. He's come out with vicious comments against Brian Kemp, who's quote unquote part of the Trump ilk, right? If you look at the 2018 gubernatorial races, it was very juxtaposed. You had someone like Stacey Abrams, who's an African American woman, very progressive, as compared to someone like Brian Kemp, who was very socially conservative on issues like guns, abortion, and healthcare. And Trump has not done himself any favors by jettisoning or just going against that mold as well. I think to your specific question right now is I would have also thought a split would be possible, right? And I would have agreed with, in terms of Ossoff and Perdue look very close. Maybe Perdue can nip it and maybe Warnock can pull off a surprise because Kelly Loeffler was not Kelly Loeffler was more pointed as compared to Perdue. But given how polarized this elections is, and given the fact that people are right now not looking at individual candidates as much, they are looking at individual candidates as Loeffler with the stock issues and Ossoff with not being old enough or having done much enough. But because it's more a referendum on Trump and the GOP establishment of the state, that a lot of people that I'm speaking to, and I'm surprised myself, are thinking it's an all or nothing. They're thinking it's a 2-0 Democrats. They see a 1-1 very hardly in between because they're like, most people are telling me I don't see a world where someone picks Loeffler and Ossoff or Warnock and Perdue, given how polarized this is. I would agree with Steve that I may be tempted to go with a Hail Mary of thinking a 2-0 Democrats. However, I'm also, given how Georgia has been right now, I wouldn't be surprised if Perdue and Loeffler pull it off. A 1-1 is, again, also in the mix. We can't rule it out, but I would right now, I'm just tempted because of the early voting, and I've seen 2.5 million people have voted. And given that the Republican establishment are also going along with the rigged elections and Trump perpetuating that this rigged election is not helping anyone because a lot of Republicans are probably going to stay at home. And that's not going to help them because a lot of the early voting right now is mostly Democrats. You've also seen that in the general, the early voting, a lot of the early voting as well, a lot of Democrats or Republicans tend to turn up on the day. And if that goes the way we're seeing right now, I would, stick my neck out there and say a 2-0. But at the same time, I would also be a little conservative and say maybe a 0-2. I don't see a 1-1 happening, but I could be wrong, like so many other things.
Wow, very interesting. So you don't see a 1-1 happening. So it'll be winner take all this way or that way, perhaps. If I mean that could be one takeaway from your this thing, perhaps. Oh, thank you so much. Now I invite Ashish Agarwal. Member?
Sure. Well, a couple of thoughts. First of all, I think that President Trump continues to be a big asset for the Republican Party. There is no one in the GOP who can motivate voters to turn out like President Trump can. There's no one who can focus the media attention on a particular issue like he can. And yes, he is and has been a very polarizing figure the past few years. Um, it's not obvious to me that any incumbent could have could have won re-election with COVID out there, with public fatigue over months and months of shutdown. I think when the public looks back at this era, just a few years from now, I do think that the administration and the president will get some credit for Operation Warp Speed and supporting the development of multiple vaccines in just record time. It's really remarkable. Within a year, we have multiple vaccines that are going to that are 90+% effective, and I think over time the president will get and his administration will get some credit for that. Having said that, I think that I think that there's a lot of reasons for optimism in the GOP. I do think that Steve and others have made the point that the early voting numbers are tilting towards the Democrats. They certainly have done a good job of banking their votes. The GOP is all in. For Georgia, they have more than 100 paid staffers on the ground, flooding the airways. I understand that both the president and the president-elect have rallies coming up. So I think that every Republican voter in Georgia is going to have heard by Tuesday multiple messages and treaties to come out and vote. And if it is the case that Georgia is still a center-right state, which I think it is based on its history, I think I think Republicans stand a very, very good chance of winning one, if not both seats. And it's interesting to hear the discussion about Joel Ossoff a little bit. Steve, I'd be curious for your thoughts on a Beto O'Rourke comparison, because when I see some of the news coverage, it sort of strikes me. He sort of strikes me as a little bit like Beto, just a youngish guy who's got a lot of a lot of support in the progressive world. But when you dig down a little bit, query as to whether there's a whole lot there. So that's one thought that I have.
Thank you so much, Ashish. Yes, interesting. Definitely so.
Yes.
I mean, the point is that,
Yes, I mean,
Steve, yeah, just a moment, please. Yeah. So definitely so, and President Trump, as you say, quite rightly, seems to be the biggest draw the Republicans have. So, and what the point is that what he's playing up to, will it yield the desired results? I think that's the, question out there. Now, that said, may I now invite Steve, definitely please, for your thoughts also, and also to carry forward to what Ashish was, kind of referring to you, please. Steve. Hello, Steve. Is your Wi-Fi playing up?
I didn't know if you were referring to me or the councilman.
No.
Maybe the councilman.
Oh, there we go.
oh yeah, can you hear me now? Can you hear me
Yes,
now?
sir.
Yep.
All right, I'm sorry. Real quickly, I would say that first of all, I think that President Trump's recent behaviors, I think, in terms of not conceding the election, when there has been really no evidence of all the court cases have been thrown out, I think many people, even Republicans and moderate Republicans, are quite concerned the message the president is saying. I think if he had just said, look, I lost the election, we've got to move on, but we're going to keep fighting for many of the things I stood for, I think he'd be better off. But I do think these recent tweets and refusal to accept Joe Biden as the president-elect of the United States and the next president will hurt him, will hurt these Republicans possibly, with maybe moderate Republicans not staying at home. I think what I've talked to some Republican friends in Georgia, some of them have lost faith in the fact that it's not good for American democracy to be behaving like this. And Senator Loeffler and Senator Perdue, I think, they're U.S. senators. I think they should do the right thing, and they should say, look, the president has lost, and if we win, we're going to work with President Biden, but they're being very silent. So I do believe that the recent behavior of President Trump is hurting him within his own base. The question, though, however, is will it hurt enough? Senator Loeffler and Perdue have done the wise thing of actually saying that they're going to they support the $2,000 stimulus checks, which I think could help bring in more of the moderate Democrats and independents who, as she said, have really been hurting with the slow economy. So the final thing I will say is that I think that in terms of the question about John Ossoff and the comparison to Beto O'Rourke, I don't know as much about John Ossoff, but it does concern me. To be a U.S. senator, I don't know whether he has the experience, having been in any elected position or having been tested in any way, whether he'd be ready to serve the nation at such a young age. But he does bring with him the millennials, the younger voters, and so who knows, the progressives. But will he be able to bring in those moderates and independents? So I'm not really, so but to answer your question, Robinder, I think that President Trump's recent behaviors and activities is hurting him in his own party in Georgia and could potentially help elect 2 Democratic senators or at least 1.
Sure, Ashish, just a moment. Thank you so much, Steve. Okay, Ashish, before going to Steven, it seems you have a comment. So, a quick comment, please. Welcome.
Let me just say, let me just say a word about that. With all due respect, I'm going to call a little bit of hypocrisy on my friends on the other side of the aisle on election integrity issues. The Democrats spent 2+ years of the Trump administration questioning the integrity of the outcome of the 2016 election, coming up with all sorts of fantastical theories about Russian collusion and Cambridge Analytica and all these sorts of things that were the real cause of why President Trump won in 2016. It really undermined I think faith in our institutions and in the presidency, and it was very bad for our republic. We are still today less than 2 months from Election Day, and yes, the president and his supporters and his legal team have looked into allegations of fraud and made a number of legal challenges, and it does in fact seem to be the case that there was not enough provable fraud to tilt the outcome of the election. So I can see that, and I wish President-elect Biden the best in leading our country over the next 4 years. But I don't think there was anything inappropriate at all with looking into what in some states seem to be credible allegations of ballot stuffing or lack of signature verification or some of these other things that you've heard about, and to pursue those. And again, we are still less than 2 months from Election Day, and to let those play out over that short period of time, I think is completely appropriate. And I trust that President-elect Biden will see a very different tenor from the loyal opposition of the Republican Party than President Trump saw from the Democrats.
Thank you so much, Ashish. Yes, absolutely. As we've said, this platform is for sharing of viewers, of our views for the benefit of our viewers, and maybe contributing to the narrative or to the meta narrative which is out there, which we'll come to. Thank you so much, Ashish, for your intervention. May I invite now Stephen Alonso, Government Affairs and a PAC Manager of the US India Political Action Committee. Stephen, my question to you would be the same as we started this round with. What do you make of President Trump's, tweets, his strategy, let's say? There must be some strategy or game plan to which he's working. Do you think that's helping or hurting the GOP cause in Georgia?
Well, I do actually want to piggyback off what we were discussing before regarding comparisons of O'Rourke to John Ossoff. To be frank, at least Beto, I just need to point out, because we have 2 panelists who can sort of relate. First off, Beto O'Rourke spent time as a mayor pro temp of El Paso, as well as he was a U.S. congressman for about 6 years. So compare that to John Ossoff, who has spent time as an investigative journalist and was not even a senior member of congressional staff of Congressman Hank Johnson in Georgia. So yeah, to be quite frank, I don't even think that's a fair comparison at all. What other than run for office recently has John Ossoff done? And yeah, he's a movie producer, and I'm not knocking folks in the film industry or any of that by any means, but I would even almost frankly point out some of the negative views towards Senator Loeffler are her part time in the business world and success there, and it's like, wouldn't you rather have somebody who's actually built something, hired somebody, had success versus, like I said, what really has John Ossoff done of recent? To be frank, he had a TSSCI top secret clearance for not even 6 months when he was serving in the House himself under Congressman Johnson. Like, a lot of his accomplishments are very few and far between. So, and I'm not saying he's the one running for senator. So, and in terms of with regards to what President Trump's tweets and such, he very values that form of communication, even way practically before he began running. And of course, there's a lot of tweets that maybe there's a tweet for everything, as we came to find out. But in terms of that, help or hurt, it's more of he's going to do what he's going to do, and that's how he deems more effective communicating. So I can't see very much folks who are here trying to struggle through the pandemic with job losses and watching small businesses sit there and go, yeah, well, somebody's Twitter tweets are really going to make me check a certain box in the ballot. I don't quite believe in that's really helping or hurting anybody's cause per se. But I do really, I just piggyback to before. Like I said, I'm not knocking journalists or mayor pro tems or anything in that aspect, but it's just very what has John Ossoff done to deserve the congressional seat he ran for? Now the Senate seat he's running for, besides a higher profile. And yes, politicians, once we're kind of not less well known, or they tend to maybe have to lose a few times or to win, and it makes them increases their exposure. But it just kind of I'm not a Georgia voter, but what has John Ossoff done to deserve or merit his seat? I don't know.
Great question, Stephen. And I think that's what should be the benchmark we hold all public leaders to. What has he or she done, or what has? But perhaps you could also think of the potentials. I mean, somebody has to start out somewhere also. That could be another view also. But absolutely a brilliant point. Thank you so much, Stephen. Now, as we move into the third round, in this round, what we'll be discussing is that the impact of these results on the working of the US Senate, and the policy impact or influence it could have one way or the other, with, let's say, some of the key issues out there which would come up for consideration by the Congress or the US administration. So what do you think the composition of the Senate, how would it, in any of the scenarios, 0-2-1-1-2-0, how do you think the Senate would be engaging and delivering to the American people? And we'll come to international affairs also in the next round and its impact on Indian American issues, but in the next round. But in this round, overall, on US domestic policy to solve whatever the challenges which any nation faces and whatever challenges the US faces today. So may I start with you, please, sir? Akshar. Akshar.
Yeah, I think very simply, just the numbers itself right now, it's to reiterate what I said in the beginning, right now you have 50 Republican senators, 46 Democrat, and Angus King of Maine and Bernie Sanders of Vermont. And, Bernie Sanders, of course, more of a familiar name to people outside, given his both presidential rounds in 2016 and 2020. But we both know that these two senators do tend to caucus and align more on Democrat issues. So from the Republican perspective, it's like McConnell would take one of the two, because 51 is all it takes to hit the holy grail of majority. At the same time, the Democrats need all, or nothing would again be catastrophic, but it would be catastrophic from the Republican perspective as well, right? Because holding control of the Senate is the last thing that the Republicans would have going for them in the 2020 race, having lost the White House and the House of Representatives. And as mentioned before, a tiebreaker 50-50, if at all it comes to that, we would come up to the Vice President-elect, which would be Kamala Harris, part of the Democrat Party. On the foreign policy issue, that's very interesting because both Ossoff and Warnock, and generally what we've seen right now, have tend to obviously kept the issues very domestic focused. Healthcare is, of course, some of the primary concerns, and because of COVID, obviously, and healthcare, of course, is sort of be part of Biden's agenda. If you think about it, what Biden did in this election was sort of what Ossoff and Warnock are doing. The sense is more awesome than Warnock. It's not so much Biden ran on a platform, but not really having a platform to run on, right? It was sort of Obama 3.0. The old guard has got to come back, and Tony Blinken and Ron Klein and Susan Rice getting a position as well. It was sort of what I would think of what Brutus said, when he assassinated Caesar. Not that I love Caesar less, I love Rome more. So this election was not so much of people loving Biden, but more than they having an issue with Trump, a referendum on Trump, on a lot of things, from COVID to all the years, all the shenanigans of the last 4 years and the Twitter tirades. And I think that's what it's come down to as well. And I would agree with Stephen as well. There's a lot of question marks on John Ossoff. I mean, he's way too young. In a lot of ways, Buttigieg too was very qualified as a candidate, but not qualified enough for president, right? Because we think about 4 years ago, the guy was not old enough to run for president, and now he is running as, by quote unquote, the most qualified candidate. By running, you're posturing that you are the best person for the job. That being said, while it's a fair question of Ossoff, a lot of Democrats and a lot of people I'm speaking to, especially among the Indian American community, are like, Purdue is just way worse. They see it as a choice between Red Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, and red and blue could be metaphoric here. And they just see that, look, yeah, we don't like Ossoff. I mean, he's a nice guy, but he's clearly not qualified. His resume is a little thin for something like this. And the Democrat establishment got behind him, especially having lost to Karen Handel in 2017 in the Georgia special election. And now, all of a sudden, well, I'm not good enough for Georgia 6th district, but I'm good enough to be the senator. It just seems a little incongruous. But people are just sort of looking at it as a referendum on Trump and the fact that Purdue and Loeffler have attached themselves so close to Trump bandwagon. And let's not forget, I think David Perdue did himself no favors by deliberately mocking Kamala Harris's name, right? It was, it was a sort of, what I don't care about the spin machine of saying that, it was a mispronunciation. That was not a mispronunciation. That was a guy who was just used to John, Bob, Joe names, and anything that's an anomaly to it, he is just going to spin it. And of course, Kamala Harris being Indian American itself offended a lot of people, and offended a lot of people of color as well. And David Perdue did himself no favors by that. Not in the state of Dr. King, not in the state of John Lewis. And of course, someone like John Ossoff, who got his earliest moorings by interning in John Lewis's office back when he was 16, that did him more favors. In fact, that elevated John Ossoff's funding far more. So Purdue did a classic own goal there. But neither on your last part of foreign policy itself is there's very little that Ossoff and Warnock have said on the foreign policy trade, partly because Georgia is right now focusing on domestic issues. But the Indian American community right now, I mean, of course, Ashish may disagree, but a lot of the people I've spoken to do tend to sort of prefer voting on the Democrat front. But of course, exceptions to the rule do exist.
Thank you so much, Akshay, for your analysis and your thoughts, for sharing. Guys, folks, we can see that several folks are watching this live stream. Please come up with your comments and questions, or for the viewers. What happens, many times folks look at live stream shows. They do not realize, you don't realize that you can, as an audience, put in your comments, which can be shared with the guests. So anyone who's watching right now, please, you are welcome to put in your comments or thoughts, and we'll take up the questions with our guests up here on this panel. Now, may I invite Ashish?
Sure. Sure. Let me pick up on those last comments, and I'll offer a meta observation on your last comment. You're absolutely right. I mean, the numbers reflect that Indian Americans, by a 3-to-1 margin in past elections, have voted Democrat more than Republican, and something that I and others are working hard to try to change. From my own perspective, I think Indian Americans are and should be natural Republicans from a fiscal responsibility standpoint, in terms of traditional emphases on education and school choice, and issue after issue. I do feel like Indian Americans, at least my family and other Indians who I know, line up very naturally with the GOP, and it's incumbent upon the Republican Party, quite frankly, to pay more attention to Asian American and Indian American voters. I think we've been trying to do that a little bit, but there's still a long way to go. My meta observation, though, is that I actually think that one of the best things that could happen for the Biden presidency would be for Republicans to hold the Senate. And here's why. If Republicans hang on to the Senate, you'll have the locus of power and setting the agenda will remain in the White House, and you will have a very traditional model where President Biden has to cut deals that are broadly acceptable both to the Democratic Party, excuse me, and to the American people by finding compromises with, excuse me, a Republican Senate. If Democrats reclaim the Senate, I think the locus of power and the ability to set the agenda shifts to the far left of the Democratic Party, and you're going to see, the progressives like Senator Warren, really have an ability to drive the agenda and discussion in Washington. I think you would see discussions about things like whether to pack the Supreme Court with more Supreme Court justices, whether to try to eliminate the Electoral College, get rid of the filibuster, enact the entire Green New Deal. Somebody made a point earlier that this last election cycle wasn't so much a pro Biden vote and voting for the Biden agenda, which to this day remains a little bit amorphous, shall we say, as much as a referendum on COVID and the administration's response to COVID. Well, if you believe that, and I've heard friends on the left kind of agree with that general analysis, the public is not looking to remake the economy or undermine the foundations of American capitalism or enact trillions of dollars of new taxes. They want a centrist leader to kind of return us back to a little bit of normality. And I think a Republican Senate would actually be very good for President Biden in doing that.
That's an interesting point. Thank you so much, Ashish. The fact that yes, if both the houses are with the party of the president itself, the kind of heft is more with the legislative side rather than the executive, because then he is probably not able to broker deals, or there is within the party conflict, so to say. Thank you so much. And with that, I think Steve would now be happy to take on the same question as to how do you see the policy impact or the workings of the Senate, or between the Senate and the Congress, the House or the Congress, uh, impacted by the results of this election?
Well, I think there's a couple from a policy perspective. We're going to talk about foreign policy in a minute, but I think number one is many Indian Americans are affected by immigration reform, and I think if the Democrats win the Senate, you could have a chance. I've even spoken to Senator Tillis about this, about immigration reform. From our senior senator from North Carolina, would we have a deal on Dreamers, the DACA immigrants, finally, of what we're going to do, illegal immigration, addressing border control, but accelerating the path to citizenship for the thousands and thousands of H-1B holders. We forget that if you came from India today and applied for a skilled visa, it would take you 150 years to become a citizen. So there's such a backlog. We have over 40,000 in North Carolina. And so I think immigration reform would be one. Two, healthcare. We know the court struck down, upheld Obamacare, but what are they going to do with Medicaid expansion? What are they going to do about continued rising costs of healthcare, reducing the cost of prescription drugs, pre-existing conditions? I think all of these things will be critically important. And then an economic recovery. I think if the Democrats win the Senate, there may be a chance of getting more money into the hands of businesses and stimulus. I do agree with the point, though, that perhaps a Republican Senate would enable them to work on issues that may have more of a bipartisan appeal, like infrastructure reform, which would be one where I think all the Republicans and Democrats could get together, much needed infrastructure reform, investments in transit, investments in rail, upgrading and our bridges. And then the final thing I would say is the makeup of the court. Which I think will affect, if, for example, Republicans hold on to the Senate, you're going to have it harder to get through Supreme Court nominees. But whether we're going to see Roe v. Wade overturned, and if that was overturned, then in states, they could actually go in our legislature in North Carolina, they could actually change this state law and make abortion illegal in North Carolina, or possibly make it much harder. Transgender and LGBT protections, these kinds of things. So, Robinder, I could go on, but I do think from the economy, from healthcare, from immigration reform, these are very significant policy areas that I think will be impacted by this election on Tuesday.
Thank you so much, Steve. Absolutely so. Thank you for sharing your insights with us and with our viewers, folks. Whoever is watching, please. I can see many people liking the live stream right now, but nobody's kind of asking questions. So, wake up. This weekend, we know, slow weekend, but maybe a holiday weekend, or enjoy the conversation. Absolutely up to you. Thank you. May I now invite Stephen Alonso, Government Affairs and PAC Manager for the US India with the US India Political Action Committee. Stephen, your thoughts on the topic of this round, that what impact on Senate's policy making and where the policy making could shift or not shift depending upon how these results come out?
Well, one thing I think is very interesting to note is that, so if the Democrats do pick up both seats, that'll be the 50-50 tie, with Vice President Harris splitting the tie. Now, there's been a few senators, such as like Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who have already mentioned long before these results, before even voting began with these Georgia Senate runoffs, he said he's not going to be the 50th vote to make it 50-50 split when it comes to eliminating the filibuster, when it comes to expanding the Supreme Court. So I don't mean to kind of be a Debbie Downer per se, but I really just think it's going to be a very, very hard plight. A very this isn't 2008 in terms of when they were able to pass Obamacare on the very thinnest of margins. That quote unquote margin quite isn't even there. If the Democrats were to pick up both Senate seats, it's going to be very hard to legislate and to sit here and say we have a mandate to do such things as eliminate student debt, such things as expanding the Supreme Court, just with the pure numbers themselves. Now, I'm not saying that's nothing they can't do it or won't. I can't sit here and predict that per se. But when it comes to like a very strong, strict mandate, even with when it comes 50-50, like are they really going to attempt to push through sweeping legislative cultural changes for us in society? I don't quite see that happening.
But in terms about all that, don't you agree that the pressure would be there, that's what the agenda would be dominated by, whether to pack the Supreme Court or not? Whereas if Republicans keep the Senate, that's off the table. But if Democrats have, and I agree with you, the votes might not be there. It seems to me that's where they'll certainly try.
That could be something.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go for it, Steve.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm just saying that I think recently President Biden, one major test for President-elect Biden was, he took a lot of flack for not putting in Elizabeth Warren, the Department Secretary of Treasury, Bernie Sanders, the Secretary of Labor, and he held off the fights from the progressives, even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, really getting mad at the President-elect Biden. But he held us to his own, and he's putting more moderate. So I think that President Joe Biden is actually the kind of president that Republicans would be comfortable working with, and that he hasn't just caved into the progressive left as the president. And I do believe that he means what he says, and that even the people who didn't vote for him, he wants to be a president. Now, of course, once he's sworn in on January 20th, it's going to be like, okay, well, what have you done for us lately? But I just say that because I don't know whether he would pack the court. If the Democrats did win the Senate, a lot of pressure, but I don't think Joe Biden will do that. But like I said, it's all conjecture. Maybe when you get in the Oval Office,
and sort of. But then, so I guess what
yeah.
Sort of then what Ashish, I think, is alluding to is that going to backfire to Democrats? Just because, the pressure is there to do so many of these things and certain ideas, certain, very hardened things that they, grabbed and ran on. Now, granted, not saying it was a policy election we just had, but like I said, it could be something that backfired, could not. Interesting to see how it's going to play out. And especially what you said, Steve, in terms of, it's not, I'd be more encouraged to see whether it is is this year with President-elect Biden compared to President Obama? Because for as much as President Obama has made changes as he did get done, he wasn't quite a convalescer. He was more of a, I'm going to go my way then. If you're not, get on board or don't, we're going to make it happen. And so, whereas, Joe Biden definitely is more of let's bring folks together. He was a very, very moderate senator for all those years. So, that is, if there's one person that perhaps who could maybe, hey, we might actually have an infrastructure this week, this cycle where we maybe get something done. Instead of I'm sure as a journalist knows, he got tired of covering infrastructure work week over and over and over. But so hopefully, like I said, hopefully it is for the better of the country.
Yeah, I agree. Yep. And I think 2022, the good news for all you Republicans out there, it's going to be a big Republican year, 2022. So I would really wonder if I was being asked by the Democrats to run for the U.S. Senate, I would really, really look at it hard because it's going to be Republicans coming out big. That's just my prediction. So 2022 is going to be a big year for Republicans. You can bet on it.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Steve. We have Steve and Stephen and Steve. So thank you, folks. Okay, now we are moving into the penultimate round, and then the last round would be your close-up wrap-up comments. This round, to which we alluded and touched in the previous one, I would like to keep it more focused on foreign policy. Right? Once again, looking at the point that, let's say, the Biden administration and the composition of the Senate, how do you think it will shape American foreign policy, especially with regards to China? So may I begin with Akshay Girdhardas, please? Sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I love talking about foreign policy. Think about it this way, right? In a lot of ways, when Biden himself was asked to be vice president in 2008, or on Obama's ticket rather, it was vice presidents were always picked to win elections, either deliver a swing state or compensate for something that the incumbent does not have, right? And Obama was a novice freshman senator competing against a very sagacious statesman, John McCain, who had years of foreign policy experience. So how do you beat an old guy called John? You pick an old guy called Joe. That was sort of the Democrat strategy then. And Biden, of course, is no stranger to foreign policy, not just vice president, but head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And if you look at the appointments that he's made, right from Tony Blinken, he's an old-timer from the Obama-Biden era, served as deputy NSA under Susan Rice. And of course, we all remember the Situation Room photo where he's there. So he's well-versed in it. So it's sort of, instead of going and picking people like Chris Murphy, a senator, he's gone and picked a policy wonk, and I think you've seen that as well with Jack Sullivan. And, he's on the foreign policy front, what I think is on China, it's going to be small yard, high fence. It's going to be less Twitter tirades of what Trump was, because Biden, well, let's just face it, Twitter is going to get a lot more boring under the Biden administration. It's going to be little, snippets of policy outlook and a little bit of hope and optimism outlook. I think what China has got coming is that, don't forget, and even under Obama, and one thing Obama and Romney coalesced on was China and trade, and how China needs more sanctions. Of course, that was during the 2012 elections. The small yard high fence comes about with the fact that there will be less bellicosity. Like Biden won't go the Trump way of going around with trade wars and tariffs, but the restrictions will be high. Particularly, we've seen right now with TikTok being banned, with Huawei on 5G, that there will still be national security concerns. I think what Biden will do stronger that Trump didn't do was there won't be any affinity to strongmen. So Putin and Kim Jong-un, you're not going to see. You're unlikely to see this random handshaking summits with Biden and Kim Jong-un, or Biden speaking wondrous things about Putin, for example. On the India front, let me be clear on that. I would say this, right, and this is what I've kind of written on a lot before the election, is that the U.S.-India relationship in the last 25 years is become politically agnostic. And I think that both Democrats and Republicans can coalesce. Not just a China angle, because the elephant in the room is always a dragon, China. But if you think about it, just think about it. Since Clinton Vajpayee, we've had every permutation combination of Democrat, Republican, BJP, Congress. You've had Clinton Vajpayee, that was Democrat, BJP, Vajpayee, Bush, that was BJP, Republican, Bush or Obama, that was Bush, Manmohan, that was Republican and Congress, and Obama, Manmohan, that's Congress, and that was Congress and Democrat, and of course you had Modi, Trump, and Modi, and now Modi, Biden. You had Modi, Obama, Modi, Trump, Modi, Biden. So Modi's become the first prime minister since Indira Gandhi who's dealt with 3 consecutive presidents, because that's not happened in a long time. And also the way that Modi dealt with Obama, the way he had a convivial relation with Trump, and the way he's going to have a convivial relation with Biden as well. That's more of how India's handled foreign policy, right? Because when Trump came on the world stage, a lot of countries, and I spoke to diplomats in some other countries, were like, well, this throws out every playbook we had in terms of dealing with the US because we don't know how Trump's going to deal with it. And the fact that Modi had these grand shows, I mean, I get they're all for spectacles in terms of Howdy Modi in Houston or Namaste Trump in Ahmedabad. It's just picking up where the Obama administration left off and consolidating it. Of course, there was no trade deal, but under Biden, there will be the India partner, US partnership will only go from strength to strength. Now, of course, will there be the trade deal, the GSP preferences? That remains to be seen. But by and large, that's something I'm optimistic on. So to sum it up on foreign policy, with China, it's going to be small yard, high fence. There'll definitely be China not off any hook yet, but this the approach will be less, Trump and bellicosity. And I think Russia as well will be again the forefront. And I think what the most important thing you're going to see under the Biden and the Senate administration is the return to multilateralism. What Trump sort of did was sort of economic nationalism and looking inward. Again, the TPP was sort of Obama's signature move towards Asia. Trump pulling out of that was sort of, scoring an own goal in some ways. It was like letting China win without stepping on the field because that's what Southeast Asia and ASEAN wanted, growing under Beijing shadows. So under Biden, there will be a push towards going back to the Paris Accord, the climate change. We've seen with Kerry coming on as the climate czar. There'll be push for multilateralism. What Biden and the Senate, if he gets the Senate that he wants, will say that America is open for foreign policy business once again.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Akshay. Very well rounded, absolutely, and many nuances there. May I take the same question to Ashish now, please? Ashish, what do you think? How the composition of the Senate or the results of this, which would then shape the composition of the Senate, how would that affect American foreign policy, especially towards China?
Well, if Republicans keep the Senate, then it forces the Biden administration to consult Republicans on to a much greater degree on major foreign policy decisions. A Republican Senate will have greater ability to influence President Biden's appointments through the confirmation process, much more control over purse strings, treaty ratification, oversight. It just means much more consultation than you might have otherwise. I agree with almost everything that was just said in terms of President-elect's approach to foreign policy and multilateralism in China and everything else. I do very much hope that the president-elect will keep President Trump's focus on China. I think that's one of the things that President Trump deserves credit for, which is standing up to China. I think the world now recognizes that China's vision is not one of free trade and democracy spreading around the globe, and it's one that the United States really needs to play the lead role in opposing. And I very much hope that President Biden continues to do that. With respect to India, fingers crossed that our new vice president-elect will treat that relationship as a priority for her and for the new administration. I would absolutely love to see the incoming vice president be able to broker a new trade deal with India, for example, and to further deepen those ties. So certainly during the campaign, she played up her Indian heritage, and certainly as Indian Americans, I think we can all be very proud of that, to have her in that role. Let's see what she does with it, and fingers crossed, India becomes a new stays a priority for the new administration.
Thank you so much, Ashish. Interesting perspectives, absolutely. May I now invite Steve Rao, council member
Yeah.
and former mayor pro tem of Morrisville, North Carolina.
Yes.
Your thoughts, the composition of the
foreign-
Senate would influence the foreign policy.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, I think my panel esteemed distinguished guests have done a great job, highlighting some of the foreign policy changes. I think you'll definitely see a President Biden take on Putin and Russia much more aggressively, particularly amidst the recent cyber attacks against our Homeland Security agencies, our Department of State. I think this is a critical issue that we need. I mean, it's been linked to Russia. So I think he's going to be more of a hardliner against Putin. I don't think you're going to see this president say that Putin's a wonderful man, a good person, and so I think you're going to see hardline stances within China. It's going to be a different policy. I think it's going to be this president. I think you'll see is going to have to find a way to engage with China on issues of public health, cyber attack issues, trade, climate change. And at the same time, he's going to have to be a hardliner in terms of China aggression in that part of the world. I think if you look at U.S. foreign policy towards China, it really has been sort of like, well, we want you to be more democratic and everything. But at the same time, their authoritarian government has made them an enemy of the United States. And I think we're going to have to figure out a way to create a situation where we can engage with China, but still be tough with China. I don't know how he's going to do that, but the trade wars didn't really help our consumers at all because, prices of costs and goods went up. In terms of India, this is the very most important strategic relationship in the world between the world's largest democracy and oldest democracy. I can't tell you as an elected official, a lot of Indian Americans were very upset at some of the former vice president, and president-elect remarks about the Kashmir and those kinds of things, how we play those out with working with Modi. But I think President Biden has experience dealing with Modi. Sanjay Puri worked with him when he was a U.S. senator and head of foreign relations. And I think Biden's already reached out to Modi. And they'll figure out a way to work on trade, on economic investment, on business relationships, on helping India deal with the pandemic as their economy is contracted by 23%. The final thing I'll say is I think you'll see a shift back into a multilateral foreign policy, which Ashish said so well, a policy that's alliance-based. President Trump broke a lot of agreements. He dropped out of the World Health Organization, dropped out of the Paris Accords. I think you're going to start seeing, climate change being an area where we can engage the rest of the world on making progress. America's stance in the world saying, yes, it's America first, but our success is also dependent on the rest of the world. And how are we going to help these economies rebuild? And I'm hoping that this president will help strengthen democracy in the southern hemisphere of our world, as dictators in Venezuela and other countries are just really awful. And many people are fleeing those countries to come to the United States. So part of our immigration issue is having stronger democracies in those areas. So I've covered foreign policy in 3.5 minutes, but I do think that this election is important in terms of having a U.S. Senate that is helping build back a multilateral alliance-based foreign policy for the United States of America.
Thank you so much, Steve. Interesting perspectives, throwing lights for benefit of our viewers. Folks, I can see many people are watching. Several people are liking the stream right now. Please put in your questions and thoughts. As a moderator, it's my job to kind of keep on reminding our viewers, whosoever is watching, that please come on, guys, join in, pitch in, put in your questions, come by. Thank you so much. May I now invite Stephen Alonso, Manager for Government Affairs and the Political Action Committee at the U.S. India Political Action Committee. Stephen, what do you see? How would American foreign policy be impacted by the results of this elections in Georgia due on Tuesday? You're on mute, sir.
I'm on mute. Hey, welcome back. So, yes, I was trying to describe part of the, it's going to be very interesting to see the final results on Tuesday and how they do play out in terms of foreign policy wise, whether the support is there to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. And so, of course, Biden gets to do that himself, but it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, it seemed, there was an article put out earlier today from Reuters mentioning how, folks in China are hopeful for a stronger relationship. Obviously, there has been a lot of, the Trump administration sort of, pushing back on in a lot of the trade war, trade issues and tariffs and things of that nature. So it is sort of, universally understood that perhaps, President-elect Biden's going to have, better relationships with a lot of our foreign adversaries over in Europe and getting closer to them. But I'm interested to see how it's going to ultimately play out with, when it came to President Trump, he was able to make a lot of inroads over in the Middle East in terms of the Abraham Accords and being able to, normalize relations with certain countries that, wouldn't think we'd ever have normalized with us in Israel over the years. And the little bit that he was able to accomplish a lot of inroads there. When it comes to China specifically, though, it's going to be, I guess, depends on sort of probably what side of the fence you want to lean on in terms of, are we probably going to be able to, better our relations with China with with President-elect Biden compared to President Trump? Yes, that's very true. But however, it depends on the ultimate, interests of, I guess, sort of I don't want to sound like a populist myself, but the interests of ourselves here and on the homeland. And so it'll definitely, I think it'll be more obviously advantageous for President-elect Biden to have a Democratic Senate, just to have a more stronger, unified message of foreign policy. And obviously, then if he has a Republican Senate, it's not going to be as sort of kumbaya and rolling this together in terms of certain areas and such. Yeah, definitely when it comes to the China at this time, China and the U.S. are the two largest economies, and it's going to be just obviously there's a new sheriff in town, and we'll see how it plays out with obviously. President Trump definitely went his own way with it and had very interesting and unique viewpoints. And it was just going to be interesting to see how it all ultimately plays out in terms of what was ultimately better for the country or not. And obviously with the coronavirus pandemic, that definitely did throw a wrench in American-Chinese relations. Obviously, I think also it's going to be perhaps handled and approached a bit differently with the new administration incoming. So that's also just another factor to throw out there in terms of, it is all encompassing in seeing how it's going to ultimately, turn out.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you so much for your, thoughts and views on how you think the Senate or the final composition of the Senate would or could influence U.S. foreign policy. Now, that said, we now move to the last round, the closing round. Thank you so much, folks. We've had a fantastic panel and a rich, I think, rich collection of thoughts and analysis which has been going on, which still is on right now. May I now invite Akshab Girdhar for your closing comments and thoughts, and you can pick up, as it's a free flow, you can pick up anywhere you would like to share with the panel and with the viewers, please, sir.
Right. No, thank you, Robin, and I agree. It's been a very riveting discussion, and just fortunate to be in Georgia as I see it unfold in front of me. But I want to just touch on something that Steve Rao said, and use this sort of carte blanche session to sort of do this. Immigration, it's a very central part, and of course, you're at the U.S.-India Political Action Committee, and no matter what side of the Democrat and Republican aisle you're on this side, we kind of agree on how vital it is. And if you think about it, the H-1B system is broken, right? And this is something that I've written a lot on, and I even started a talk which said, the Indian dream was the American dream. Our Indian education system was A, B, C, H-1B. It was all about, do well in India, and you end up going to America and go for a grad school, and you get your H-1B, the green card comes, and then you live the American dream in a lot of ways. And the country would see that a lot of people in the US talk about that's benefiting of American experience is China. But in reality, in a lot of ways, it's Canada, right? I mean, if you think about it right now, what Canada is doing in immigration is telling people that I lived in Singapore, I lived in the United States, and I've kind of gone through this immigration rigmarole, is what Canada is saying that, hey, you can become a permanent resident without even being a resident. Now, that's immigration irony of the highest order, right? Because what a lot of people face in the US and Singapore is this immigration limbo that, it's almost like, employment to nowhere. Like you just continue working and working and working. A lot of times this immigration precedes employment. People can't settle somewhere. People can't form a livelihood. I mean, if we think about what our grandfather's generation was, it was like, to want of a better word, the colloquialism was roti, kapda, makan, food, clothing, shelter. Our father's generation was those three plus education and savings for kids. Our generation also becomes immigration, right? We talk about people who are in constant H-1B limbos. And as someone described it the other day was, America is that partner today that wants to be in a long-term relationship with you as an immigrant, but doesn't want to settle down. You're never going to be able to do that. And right now, everyone who's moving to Canada is a lot of the US distressed workers. And what's really been the hallmark of the US economy, the post-World War II economy, is also recognizing quality immigration that builds talent. Places like Silicon Valley and Wall Street, of course, both of their flaws, have been built on the backs of, hardworking immigrants. And I think unless we do this, and it's a remarkable thing that only Ossoff and Warnock are going to change that around. In fact, I don't even know if this is going to be there right now on the agenda. And let's not forget that this country is going through COVID. This is probably not even Joe Biden's 250th item on the agenda, because at a time of mass unemployment, the last thing you're going to do with H-1B reforms. I mean, that could happen, but it's unlikely. Let's not forget that even Obama, for all his hope and change and thing, the focus was not on high-skilled immigration, right? In fact, the last one to actually touch it was President Bush. But of course, we can argue that was pre-recession in 2004. What is really important to understand the fact that this behooves both American interests, not just Indian interests. It behooves American interests right now. I mean, Canada and Australia moved to a points-based system. I'm not an immigration expert or immigration attorney, but I do know that this kind of has really got to a point where people are not even looking at immigration as an alternative. Like, people sort of came for the employment and came for the education and came for the employment. You come to these people pick up these phenomenal skills at the universities. Obviously, at COVID right now, people are reconsidering coming to the US because it's expensive. And if you're going to come here and pay top tuition for Zoom classes, that's like paying Disneyland tickets for watching Frozen. People are thinking of going elsewhere. And that's going to come and impact the US economy. So it really behooves US interests. And I love, I don't want to impinge on anyone else's closing statements, but if they could kind of add in and touch on what you kind of see for immigration and kind of look at what immigration reform needs to be. And I know it's not going to happen in one stroke of a pen. It's not an executive order thing. But it right now, and I also understand the concern of how Indian IT companies have sort of also exploited the privileges. And I get that. But we can't cut our noses to spite our faces right now. And I think that's what's going to happen with US immigration. If you think about it, by virtue of lottery of life, you're given a US citizenship if you're born here. But you come here, do the right thing by coming here, by spending your money on good quality education, getting the jobs, paying the taxes, and there's almost like there's no pathway to getting a visa, let alone citizenship. It's almost ridiculous because by virtue of happenstance, you're born where you're born and you get a passport. And, and you try and do the right thing. It's almost like, hey, no, sorry, thank you for the tax dollars for your employment. Now off you go. And I think that's something that is really a concern. And you've seen countries like Canada benefit at the expense of US immigration. And I think it's only going to get bigger. I understand a no crisis right now with healthcare, but this is also an important thing that I think at some point, I don't know what the conversation in Washington is at a very profound level. I know it superficially. And I think at some point that conversation has to come up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akshay. Pretty interesting, and absolutely yes. I mean, immigration has too many, dimensions and nuances which are out there, ranging from innovation itself. I mean, which is a big piece, and competitiveness of the economy itself, and keeping the American dream ongoing and American economic engine, whirring and innovating as it moves ahead. Thank you so much, and especially, of course, for the Indian American community, it kind of directly impacts, or for India also and US India relations, it has a direct correlation of some sorts. But yes, there's a lot to be done out there in that. Thank you so much. Now, may I invite Ashish Agarwal, Member Advisory Board, uh, excuse me, Indian Voices for Trump. Ashish, for your closing comments, wrap up thoughts as we close this round and this discussion of the day today.
Sure. Well, thank you again to you and the panelists and the viewers. Again, I'm just delighted to see more Indian Americans, get heavily involved in the political process. Picking up on immigration briefly, I tend to agree that there likely will not be a lot of legislative, 2 years, in part because just with COVID, illegal immigration numbers, are falling, and for the reason you mentioned, with high unemployment numbers, it is hard to see, reforms to the H-1B process getting enacted into law, really even getting on the agenda. So unfortunately, I think a long-term solution is going to have to wait. Now, my closing comment, for people who are still deciding whether to vote in Georgia, definitely go out and definitely go out and cast an informed ballot. But what I would say is it really is going to have a lot of influence over the direction of our country over the next two years and beyond. I continue to think that America and Georgia are very much centrist. I would say center right. Places that are not looking for the sorts of dramatic policy changes that we could expect in the progressive direction should the Democrats capture both of those seats. So with that, I continue to remain hopeful the Republicans will hang on to one of those seats.
Thank you so much, Ashish. Yes, absolutely. By the quirk or twist of fate, Georgia today is in a position, that all eyes are focused on it, and what the results come out would absolutely impact U.S. domestic policy, foreign policy, and even the year 2022, the congressional elections and stuff like that. So it is really very critical and would be very interesting, is to say the least, as a word, to see the outcome of this race on Tuesday. Thank you so much, Ashish. May I now invite, I think, Stephen. Steve Rao, have we had your comments? I'm sorry, I just missed.
Oh, no, I'll be really brief. First of all, immigration, I totally agree with that. I brought it up earlier, but I think we wouldn't have a Zoom, we wouldn't have a Google, we wouldn't have a Yahoo, we wouldn't be flying, Elon Musk, I think, came in as an immigrant. Much of the innovation and future of our economy to compete globally is based on immigration. So I do think that it's a very important issue. Hopefully we can have another show about that eventually. But at the end of the day, I think that this election in Georgia will impact, as you said, our foreign policy, our economic policy of how we build back better and stronger, our position in the world. And I think if you look back at history, a strong America has always been good for the world. And I think when our democracy thrives and flourishes, it's good for the rest of the world. And so I hope and pray for the success of the 46th president of the United States, Joe Biden, and whoever wins this U.S. Senate seat, whether it's Senator Loeffler and Perdue or the other two, that we can build bridges with each other and work. Because as Fareed Zakaria says, there's decades when nothing happens, and then there's weeks when decades happen. And that was my favorite line of his book, which I would recommend you all to read, 10 Lessons of a Post-Pandemic World. And we've lost decades of progress in America, and I think people are really scared. Millions dying around the world. So we pray for anyone that's suffering from illness or anyone who has witnessed a death in their family. We pray for you. But at the end of the day, we've got to get healthier. We've got to get stronger economically. We have to roll this vaccine out, and we have to get the American economy back on track and then help the countries out there that need help. And so I just feel like this election, this one election on Tuesday, could have a profound impact on all of those issues moving forward. And we'll know more on Tuesday. And we know we're going to have an election result, and we know January 20th at about 1 p.m. we're going to have a new president. And let's hope and pray that him and Vice President Harris continue to be successful. And thank you for everyone having me on the show today, and I look forward to being back.
Hopefully, I'll figure out how to work the mute button. And unfortunately, our host's internet did just drop out in the meantime. And meanwhile, I'll give my closing comments in this format. So I do want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, and of course for welcoming me on. I do think it's going to be, very interesting to see the final results. What was mentioned earlier, that I guess could be my political wonky predictions of a 1-1, or that's always the grand dream of a presidential final results of the election are a 269 tie. Yeah, the likelihood probably of it being 1-1 isn't probably very high, because it is probably going to be the very, as we've seen results of polarized elections of recent, that it's just going to be, a lot of folks just kind of voting along party lines. Me personally, like I said, I don't even think John Ossoff to Pete Buttigieg comparisons are fair, even just because at least Pete Buttigieg had served as a mayor of a town, and whereas John Ossoff was a middle of the road congressional staffer for barely a year or two. I just don't think that's quite the gumption and credentials. But also, I can also see where it comes into play with Reverend Warnock being the influential community leader, regardless of some comments that he made, running against the very successful businesswoman senator who also has the stains of her the stock fraud of recent. So it's going to be very interesting to see the end of the discussion and in the end of the race and final results. I guess I got to stick with my one prediction of it being 1-1, but it does seem like that'll be very unlikely being the final result. So to sort of wrap up this discussion, we do want to thank all of our distinguished panelists for joining us, and hopefully those watching and viewing will be able to come join us next week as we do then reflect on the results of this Senate Georgia race, and along with then now actually having we will now what Congress will look like, and then we can have a great discussion there as to what we can sort of help predict and see and know what to expect. And of course, please stay tuned to our Facebook page for future panels covering the upcoming presidential inauguration, amongst other things. And as our esteemed host returns, I was about to help him with his final role and message. But so I'll let him sort of have the final closing remarks. And I do want to thank everybody for joining and watching with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen. As I said, the only thing we have to fear other than the sky falling on our heads is losing broadband. So thank you so much. But luckily we were towards the end, and thank you so much, Stephen, my esteemed colleague and equally, a co-host of this program. So thank you so much, Stephen, for, closing. I think we've got the closing comments from all speakers now, right?
Yeah.
So that said, it's my pleasure and honor to thank our esteemed speakers, Akshay Giridhar Das, former journalist and public policy professional. Thank you so much, Akshay. Our thanks from the US India Political Action Committee and the Imaginary Institute to Ashish Agarwal, a member of the advisory board, Indian Voices for Trump. Thank you so much, Ashish. Our thanks, of course, to our old friend Steve Rao from the US India Political Action Committee, Imaginary Institute, and myself for participating and sharing your thoughts. Thank you so much. And of course, humongous thanks to Stephen, who helped us to put this show together and got in touch with you folks to bring a good collection of ignited minds who could share this conversation. So thank you so much, Stephen. And with that, we come to the
Thank
end
you.
of discussion today. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
viewers who are listening in. This recording would also be available on the US India Political Action Committee YouTube page or Facebook page, actually, and you could check in. Until then, for the next week, this show now ends.